Now, Fox Sports' Joel Klatt offered up his preseason look at the teams he thinks will be part of the first ever 12-team playoff. 4 among that group come from the Big Ten, including his pick for the overall #1 seed in Ohio State. Klatt sat down with Mike Hall for much more, including story time in this edition of The Big Interview.
Always good to bring in Joel Klatt, a man who's such a giver. He once left a Cutlass Cruiser on the side of the road with keys in it. Also,
That's true. That's true. I can't believe you remember that story.
I remember. It was a good one. It was a good one. He's the lead analyst for Fox College Football, and he's good enough to join us now. And we could talk about your minor league baseball days if we want, but instead, I'd rather focus on the upcoming season in the Big Ten. Give me some idea of like what's going to make a successful season for some teams. So let me start with Ohio State. It feels, Joel, like the narrative is they have to win the national championship or it's a failure. What do you think is reasonable?
I think that to claim that you have to win it all is too much. So, that's over the pale for me. But to claim that you have to give yourself a chance to win it all, I think is absolutely on the table for Ohio State. I hearken it back to like what Tom Brady and the New England Patriots did. What did they do year in and year out? Give themselves a chance. That's why they played for so many AFC championship games. Now, having said that, I do believe that this version of the playoff, the 12-team version of the playoff, it's going to be more difficult once you get into the semifinals than what we've had in the past. Therefore, my expectation, my highest expectation on any team in the country is to get yourself in that Final Four, because at that point, it's a call, it's a turnover, it's a play. You just got to get yourself and give yourself a chance, and I think that's my expectation for Ohio State.
The Buckeyes and everyone trying to take the national title from Michigan, but it's obviously a clearly different Michigan team. The program's going in the right direction. Each of the last 3 years, they've either tied or then broken the record for most wins in the history of the program in a single season. But the head coach is gone. The star QB is gone. The star running back is gone. On and on and on down the line. What's realistic for them?
Well, and by the way, that list continues. By the way, new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator, new strength coach. The way that I've categorized it is for Michigan, everyone is different. And yet, the sentiment, in particular amongst the ranks in Ann Arbor, is that nothing's changed. So, like, how does that, work? Well, it works because they really believe in their culture. They believe in their ability to develop players, which you can't argue with after the last 3 seasons. You just can't, in particular last season, going undefeated and winning the national championship. I think realistic expectations for Michigan are that they've got to understand that self-admittedly they're a development program, more so than, let's say, an Ohio State, a Georgia, or an Alabama, or a Texas who just wants to come ready-made, top-tier talent year in and year out. Well, when you're a self-admitted development program, you're going to have little dips before the peaks, and we've seen that ramp up for the last 3 years for Michigan. So for me, even a little dip still puts them right in the playoff conversation, in particular in a 12-team format. I believe if you look at their 4 toughest games, they've got Texas, USC, Oregon, and Ohio State. I believe that they're going to win 2 of those games. If they win 2 of those games, they're going to go to the playoff, and I think that they're going to be a 9-win team as their floor, 10-win team as maybe their ceiling.
Yeah, that makes sense. A 10-2 Michigan team feels like they're in the top 12. For sure. You brought up the schedule and how it can be hard. I want to turn our attention to one of the new teams to the Big Ten, USC. Generally, when you welcome a team or a person to your house, you're kind and you welcome them. Man, USC's schedule, it's not the Big Ten's fault they open with LSU, but then their 3rd game of the year is at Michigan. Their 4th game is home against Wisconsin. They're going to have to earn it right off the bat. Yeah,
they are. Although I'm going to take the other side of that coin. I actually think USC's schedule is favorable to them. And let me tell you why. You can't just say that without saying why. Well, number one is you get to face LSU, which was a top 3 offense a year ago, coming off of a Heisman Trophy winner. When you lose the Heisman Trophy winner and you lose both of those wide receivers, Neighbors and Thomas. They also lost their offensive coordinator. When do you want to see LSU? Early, as early as you possibly can. That's the exact same equation that I would say for Michigan. When would you want to go to Michigan if you're a team that feels like you want to beat them? Early in the season, in September, when they still might be wondering about who their quarterback is, when they're still trying to get their feet wet in this juxtaposition of everyone is different and yet everything is the same. So that's when I would want to play those 2 games. Then they get Penn State at home and they get Notre Dame at home. So to me, when I looked at that schedule, they don't go back east to play a cold weather game after the middle of October. And they've got Penn State at home and Notre Dame at home after facing the teams that they need to early. To me, it's actually a very favorable schedule, and if USC is able to beat LSU, then watch out. Then you can see a clear path to a 9-win team facing Notre Dame for the right to go to the playoff. That's where I think USC sits.
Yeah, think of the narrative shift around that program if they win on Sunday against LSU. Yeah. I mean, that's a massive change.
And by the way, those two, I don't think that there's a bigger game week one in terms of the narrative surrounding college football, and in particular these two conferences. The narrative all year, and we have to just be prepared for this. This is going to be the new style of college football, is like, how many teams does each of these power conferences get? I believe that we have Power 2 conferences, Big Ten and SEC, and they're going to be vying for the most amount of participants that they possibly can get into the college football playoff. So think about it. These two teams are sitting basically in the same spot in their conference in terms of preseason narrative, right around anywhere from 4 to 5 where they're picked. And so they're on equal footing within those conferences. So a head-to-head victory is going to mean a whole lot moving down to the stretch. That's why this is such a big game on Sunday night.
You know, I'm curious, Joel, since you brought that up, kind of like a very macro point about college football. One of the things that bummed me out when we went to the 4-team playoff was I felt like too much of the focus too early in the year was just on those 4 teams. Yeah. I'm curious how much you think the shift to 12 is going to affect the way we as media members and we as fans look at the regular season in college football.
Yeah, so to answer that, I would have to go back further than the 4-team playoff, because prior to the 4-team playoff, there were a lot of ways, mechanisms, results, levers that you could use to define yourself as successful, whether you were a program or a fan base. I think you would agree with that, right? Mm-hmm. A New Year's Bowl was defined as successful. You know, you would get to the... Largely, this is the way that Wisconsin built their entire program. They never played for a national championship, and yet they built their program into one of the most successful programs in the country because they had avenues to define themselves as successful until the 4-team college football playoff, which then sucked all the oxygen out of the air in terms of that definition of success. And now all you could do was go to the playoff, or else it was going to be a failure, and that's not what the fans wanted, and the players were going to opt out of the bowl games. And that was it. So once the toothpaste was out of the tube, you can't put it back in and go all the way back. So what do you need to do? Expand within reason the definition of success. I like 12, maybe 14, because it retains the level of importance of the regular season for the top tier teams to get the buy into the playoff, but it also expands that definition of success. For instance, an example, I think that we are on the precipice of having a November where 25, maybe 30 teams and fan bases feel like they have a legitimate path to the college football playoff. That's going to be incredible for the sport.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking of it. Instead of 5 to 8 teams in November that have fan bases that are in it, you could triple that amount because the size of the playoff has tripled instead. And to put a bow on this, you don't think that the September games will feel far less important, because there will be 2 and probably some 3-loss teams that end up making it in the playoff.
I think when you actually go about an exercise of filling in and predicting a bracket, you realize that this notion of a 3-loss team getting in is iffy. That's why I think Michigan might need to go 10-2. This is why Oklahoma, even with their tough schedule, probably needs to go 10-2, even if that's going to be incredibly difficult. Which means that the regular season's actually still going to mean a lot. That loss that Florida State had on Saturday to Georgia Tech puts them behind the 8 ball. They now basically have to win the ACC, in my estimation, or else they're not going to get into the playoff. So it's a balancing act. You want to try to retain the level of importance and the meaningful nature of the regular season, as well as expand the definition of success. And I think that we're in the right model. Maybe it grows to 14. Then you would retain 2 buys and not 4 buys. All of those things I think will play itself out. But if I know college football fans like I think I know them, games are not going to lose their importance.
Right.
They just aren't.
Yeah. And we look at the NFL, people still flock to games on TV and in the stadium in September, for sure. Final 30 seconds, I know you got to run. You have Penn State and West Virginia this week. I think Drew Aller is a fascinating college football figure. He had great numbers last year, but just that next level was missing from him, especially against the big teams. He's got a new offensive coordinator. What do you expect to see from him week one?
I've always thought that he is a supremely talented player. I didn't feel like what was going on schematically was a great fit for his skill set last year. He is a strong-armed quarterback that needs to push the ball and threaten the defense down the field. And that's not what they did. In fact, when you look at their average air yards per attempt, it was near the bottom of both the Big Ten and, in a lot of cases, the country. That needs to change, and I think it'll change with Andy Kotelnicki, their new offensive coordinator. I think that this is a team I'm very high on. There was no team hurt more by the 4-team format than Penn State. In the last 8 seasons, if we would have had a 12-team playoff, they would have made 6 playoffs in the last 8 years. 6. And our whole definition of James Franklin and that program would be very different if that was the case. I firmly expect that they'll be in the playoff. They've got a schedule that's advantageous. They don't have to play Oregon. They don't have to play Michigan. So for me, I'm expecting a lot out of Drew Aller himself and also that program.
Nobody makes better points in college football than Joel Klatt. Joel, always great talking to you, man. Have a great time in Morgantown.
I'm going to go try to find that. It was a Caprice.
Oh,
the Caprice that we left on the side of the road. That's right. In Idaho Falls, Idaho. Old minor league baseball stories. They're great. We could come on and just do a whole segment of minor league baseball stories.
I'll go next week. Book it.
Let's go.